whether you'll admit it or not, one of the smartest people that I know, and it's proven by your track record, your titles and places that you've been. So fill people in on where you're at and what you've been doing.
So currently, my fancy titles, I'm the applied science and reconditioning coordinator for Cal Berkeley football. So Cal football. Previously, I've been at Ole Miss, Ohio State, Marshall, Cincinnati, Colorado State. And I've played some of my played as I've coached. I've kind of been everywhere. So been thankful and lucky all in the same sentence. I apologize for my voice if you guys have trouble hearing me. Been screaming my face off and fighting a head cold. So between all the coughing and yelling, I'm still trying to fight to get my voice back. So I apologize.
What's been the biggest thing that you've learned, or not the one, right? But like as you've evolved, I mean, you've continued to just go forward. The trajectory of your career has been impressive. What's been the thing that's allowed you to keep doing that?
Honestly, I think for me, better or for worse, it's probably I'm honest, at least with myself and professionally, to a fault. So for me, it's pretty black and white in terms of how I see things. So and kind of how I present myself and how I kind of present how I handle things is typically pretty black and white. At least I try to think that way. So for better or for worse, sometimes it works out good, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's been my biggest benefit professionally, is at least I've been consistent with it.
Another thing along those lines is your title has continued to reflect your learning. How did you create that niche for yourself? How did you, for any of our listeners that are like, oh shit, like that is a bomb title. And, Kier talks about the 4 Ps, like, so that is important because whatever title and whatever salary you have sets up your next. How did you do it? How can they go about doing something similar?
I think professionally, I think it started out as, I had no clue what I was actually, honestly, any clue about anything I'm doing now. I just wanted to be a strength coach. And it turned into, as you and me have talked before, it turned into me kind of being the low man on the totem pole and eating some of kind of the shit jobs and being the injured guy babysitter, or being the intern that collects and distributes catapult bras and gets reamed out when somebody didn't. Johnny Short Dick didn't turn in his Zephyr unit. So and then it grew into, I liked it, but didn't really know much about it. And then as it kind of, oh, hey, you've done this before, and you kind of fake it till you make it. And then you actually realize you like it. And then you realize that, unless you've played in the NFL, played in the SEC, worked for the right person, if you're kind of the unassuming average white male, you better have a niche and you better be good at something. So, and I don't say that as a bad thing, but I mean,
no, yeah,
there's just a million of us. So it's for me, it's been finding there's something that's got to set you apart. And so for me, I've just been thankful that the two kind of areas I've grown, I guess, a niche in, or like I've taken a liking to, I like to think I'm pretty good at, because they kind of fit who I am as a person. Where when I was a player, I've talked with Kier before, when I was a player in college, I was always hurt. So I was always kind of interested and kind of fascinated with the rehab process, but didn't realize that was the whole return to play reconditioning spectrum was like a thing, because I didn't have that when I played. It was just, hey, you can't use your left leg, so go do the 5 sets of 5 we have on back squat on the leg press with your right leg, and we'll see you later till you get out of your boot. And then you realize, no, actually, when you do this the right way, there's actually a continuum of how to do that. And then now, me being, for better or for worse, a pretty black and white, pretty black and white person, the numbers, the objective numbers, and some of the sciencey, nerdy stuff fits in pretty well with me. So it matches. So like for me, the two things I do kind of match what I like, match what I'm interested in, match kind of how I view the world and view people and situations, and just kind of lines up. I mean, I'm not a big yeller, big screamer. I'm not a big bravado, macho, charisma personality. So in the two roles I'm in are probably anti what a lot of those things are. So I just think for me, it's been something I'm interested in, something I've been pretty good at. And it's been kind of, peanut butter and jelly. It's just kind of good fit.
I mean, to piggyback off what you said, I was the shitty athlete. I was the smart one that knew how to like do things to help with my limited physical capability. So like that's why when I hear the coactive, like that shit makes sense to me. But being smart and continuing down, like that's why I did the PhD, because like you said, there's just what can you do stuff to differentiate yourself. What has helped you become so good with the art and the science in the rehab setting? Like, where were some of the aha moments and maybe things that you did well or didn't do well along the way that has helped you, that were specifics like, yeah, I never forget this because it helped us or hurt us this way? And again, you don't need to, we're not naming names, but just from 10,000 foot view.
Yeah, no. Honestly, I think for me, it's the biggest thing of, again, me being sometimes being the neighborhood asshole a little bit, to where I'm always kind of what, and I'm wanting to ask, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And always kind of questioning or being stubborn or inquisitive. And like, even like coming up through school, or when I was a player, or when I was an intern, or when I was a younger coach, well, like, why are we doing this? Like, that doesn't make sense. That's stupid. Or, and sometimes I burn my hand on the stove, but bigger picture, it's allowed me, like, at least in the reconditioning space, to want to try to continually seek answers, or seek whys and the how to's, and almost, for good and bad, almost over educate myself sometimes, or at least it seem like I'm doing it. And because, like, for me, like you talked about as a player, I wasn't a great athlete. I'm by no means like a savant, as you try to allude to early on. I think for me, it's just, my coaching career is a lot like with my playing career, where it's just something I'm extremely interested in. So I'm extremely interested in, I'm extremely committed to, and I put a lot of time and effort into it. And it's just a patient practice over time, and it's just a lot of burnt hand on the stove situations for me, where it's a lot of do's and don'ts and a lot of lessons learned, and trying to, well, this didn't go well, this didn't go right. Why didn't it, kind of always self-auditing and auditing what I'm doing is something I've always tried to do, and then realized I wasn't doing it previously until I got around some smart people. But now always just trying to look back and see what I've done and what worked and what didn't work, and how are other people doing things, and doing, being open to new ideas. And at least in my point of view, trying to be good at filtering out the good from the bad, and what's useful and unuseful, and discard what isn't. I think honestly, that's the biggest thing for me.
You mentioned, you're the self-proclaimed neighborhood asshole, but yet you have to be playing well in the sandbox with other people if you're continuing to progress your career forward. So how were you able to be the straight shooter that you admit to being, and still do it in a way where people still want to hire you and work with you? Because whether you want to admit it or not, that's a skill set, man.
Honestly, I don't know if I have a good answer for that one. I think I've been lucky enough to where I've made good relationships with people, just trying to be who I am as a person, uh, and just kind of being unapologetic with myself, and then, just trying to show the things that I do well, whether it be genuine people, being genuinely interested in trying to learn and seek out answers from not just books and research, but people, and other people are doing things well. And that's why, like, I'm not a big social butterfly. I'm really not. But when it comes to the profession and what we do, I really like what we do, and I'm really interested and invested in what I do. So therefore, I have to, mix around at the cocktail hour, and kind of, coach talk and everything else with everybody, because that's the only way you learn and everything. Well, no, so I think that's part of it, is my quest to try to learn and answer questions has allowed me to meet and connect with coaches over the years. Uh, and then in terms of maintaining jobs, I don't know if it's something I could truly speak on, because if you were to look at my resume, it probably doesn't reflect that, as I've kind of, for coaches above me getting fired, or staff changes, or making dog crap pay, and then trying to move closer back to family, or get to the point where I have my own health insurance. So I don't know if gaining employment's been okay, but retaining employment's been, I think for me, I think you talked about the 4 Ps earlier, which I learned from Kiera also, is something that's also for me where it's always I'm trying to like consistently uh, audit where I'm at versus those things. And I think the one P I'm missing right now is kind of like a longitudinal kind of long distance purpose to where I could finally get somewhere and, feel where I can some form of security and, some form of security, we can kind of build a department or sub department within a department or ecosystem. I probably haven't been lucky enough to do that yet. A lot of it's out of my control, the sport I work with. Uh, but it's the nature of the beast when you're dictated by 18 and 22-year-olds playing a game and
Yo,
grown men wearing their jerseys and cussing them out through a TV that they don't even know exist.
I'll tell you what, there was a defensive backs coach that I work with at Iowa, who's now the defensive coordinator at Tennessee Martin. And he's like, if I was to tell you that we all are going to invest our livelihood in 18 to 22-year-old males that are surrounded by 18 to 20-year-old females with no parental supervision, and we have to keep them in line. He's like, you tell us that we're out of our fucking mind. He's like, yeah, we do it every day. So amen to that.
Well, it's fun. It's funny you bring that up because like everybody talks about, well, you can go into Vegas and gambling, but the reality in our profession, like you're gambling your professional livelihood. Whether you put a card down or a chip down at the table or not, you're gambling every single day because there's so many outside factors in our job that have nothing to do with what we do or what we can do or what we can control that are really staking your livelihood, your personal livelihood every day. Sometimes you get sometimes you'll, Kier's kind of test says is you get kissed on the cock, and other days you get the shorter. Other days you got to take a sandpaper sexual utensil. It just depends. It just depends. Sometimes you get more ways than one. It's just a flip of the coin.
But how do you, like, you personally, again, I whether you're going to give yourself credit for or not, I admire how even keel you can be about it. How do you do it for our listeners that are like, man, I need to be more even keel? He's saying that this guy is. How do you do it, and what do you recommend to listeners to do that?
Be like a duck. You calm on the top and paddle like crazy under the water. That's something I
Yeah.
probably pick from other people. To be honest, you bring up being even keel, and I'll tell you what. I mean, I might seem like that some days, but I tell you what, I'm paddling like hell underneath. So I'm just trying to figure it out like everybody else.
All right, let's dive into the nitty gritty of the rehab stuff. And, let's start with one of the things that I personally know, and you shared on your social media, is you had hip surgery, and you worked yourself with that, and talk about how that has made you a better practitioner.
That personal experience was interesting because it was something I put off for a long time. And it got to the point to where we got to COVID and I couldn't even stand up during COVID groups. I would, you're running 7, 8 groups, you're coaching for 10 hours a day, and it'll get to the point to where I got to coach my platforms and my racks, and I'm taking a knee. I just can't stand up because it's so bad.
Oh,
But yeah. Anyway, I was about 27, and I was probably about a year. If I went one more year, I was probably a year away from a hip replacement. That's how bad my hip got. And there was a lot of factors that went into it. Anyway, uh, just from that sample itself, I think that one and others, I think the biggest piece was for me was a sympathetic tone to what I could bring to the table in my role, being playing at the same level as the kids I work with every day, and the majority of the kids I work with going through the same things they did, and also I think as a whole for me, it's the fact that like I didn't get what they did or what they're getting on a daily basis because I didn't have that when I was coming up as a player. So it was mismanagement, gross incompetence, whatever you want to call it. It is what it is. Uh, but now knowing the lessons I've seen of how not to do it and trying to bank those lessons and key markers into helping the kids and showing them showing them and being able to have the sympathy because for example, with an ACL, everybody talks about, well, you should be here, 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 based on objectives or timeline criteria or whatever it is. But if that kid walks in and he's got a boatload of patellofemoral pain because he was a bone plug because he was a bone plug graft. It don't matter what you have on paper that day. He hurts like hell because he's been pushing. He needs a 3-day weekend, and those days are going to happen. It's having that sympathy as well as the sympathy I talked about, as well as the empathy to understand that we're not going to lose tomorrow or the next day for today for the sake of it, and knowing it's a long term process and thinking about again and being committed to the welfare of the athlete in the long term as well as the short term too, which is something that I probably miss as an athlete and player too. Where now I'm coming up on surgery 8 because I got to get my other hip done in the next year.
Oh
So, um,
shit.
yeah. So between my playing career, post playing career, all together, I think yeah, I've had 7
Wow.
surgeries since my senior year of high school, all from
Holy
playing.
shit.
So I think that's the biggest missing link or biggest kind of non X's and O's kind of textbook NSCA textbook answer or
Hmm.
kind of piece I would bring to the table that I would list.
What would you say most strength and conditioning coaches get wrong about rehabbing a hip or working around hip limitations? Again, we'll stay here on the hip and then we'll go to, shoulder and different in knees, ankles, different areas. Cause again, you have that title and I think you're very skilled at it. So what would be one of the, biggest areas that people screw up at the hip? And then what are some of the best things that you've seen, or you've learned?
I mean, and this probably isn't like again some Rain Man savant answer, but it's more than just simply loading and reloading, and especially in a sport for us, where one of the few, in the sport I work with, maximal strength is such a dominant factor more than other sports, even though one would argue where it actually lies. But anyway, so just loading the area around the hip and trying to gain strength and muscle masses. Everybody talks about one that, but as well too. Everybody talks about, well, we're not going to load dysfunction, or we're gonna correct motor patterns, or we're gonna get them moving well, and we're gonna retrain their gait. We're gonna retrain how they move and how they all this that and the other. But and but there, it's more than just tugging on bands and doing belly breathing and sucking on balloons and RDLs, and there's more to it. There's more to it. So like even on my personal rehab for myself, I started going through. I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know enough. It was probably an area that I would say that I would need to learn is was when I had my hip surgeries when I started really getting into PRI. I didn't go full PRI. I
Yeah,
didn't go I
no.
didn't I didn't go full sucking on the balloons and all that. But I worked with some good physios. I worked with some good physios that helped with my rehab. And that was really when I started getting into like David Gray and things like that. And you start thinking about
Yeah,
again
he's good
how
though. He's good. Yeah.
very good, and you start thinking about the kinetic chain and how like everything moves and like everything moves together and moves in unison. So what shouldn't move, what's stable, and the biggest thing was for me is how eye-opening piece for me was how much of my rib cage was connected to my pelvis and how much for me personally, uh, being, when you think you start getting into like personality types and how that affects your body posture. Uh, when for example, when you get a very expressive extension based person, you get a flared rib cage, anterior pelvic tilt. You get that open canister. Zach Decken does a really good job of teaching into some of his a lot of his stuff through his social media. I know, but in terms of people are putting out, so he talks a lot about that, and you think about like what most sports are. They're very much extension based, and especially like football. And then you think about personality types too. They're very angsty, high energy, very hyper aggressive, which is primarily football, like football or combative sport athletes. And like even for me, I was even now like I'm very expansive extension based. So like I think for me, learning how my rib cage, how my core, how my pelvis, and how my pelvis should work individually and how my ribs worked with it as a strength coach and not just a PT was extremely important for me. And it wasn't just doing monster band walks and doing cook hip lifts. It was there's more, and there's more to it. There's more to it than just the basic stuff everybody talks about.
dive into the rib cage stuff, because then I guess we can work that into the shoulder, because I know that's kind of some of the stuff that David does. How how deep down into his stuff, or what were you kind of doing with rib cage stuff, PRI or his, or how similar are the two? I haven't done PRI.
It was a bit of a mix. My my physiotherapist I worked with was very much of kind of a traditional PRI kind of practitioner, and I think the first or second day I was on the table with him that I wasn't like crying over the bone work that I had done on my hip. It was so bad. But once I was actually able to start to get a little bit of function, I looked at Mike. I was like, Mike, don't you ever have me sucking on a fucking balloon. I don't care what we do. I will never suck on a fucking balloon. Because one of his patients was doing some sort of belly. They were doing some 90-90 position while they were working on breathing, and they had belly, like they had a balloon and everything. I was like, Mike, I ain't fucking doing it. Anyway, story over. So when I think about the the rib cage itself and how it should externally internally rotate, it should flex and extend and expand, and how that bottom rib should actually come back in. It should actually come back in and help activate the core and pull everything together, right? And shorten everything to get us back into some form of flexion was a big piece for me. Kind of connecting the dots as well too, the understanding, like for example, like just slamming like on the hip itself, just slamming into uh, adductor rocks or couch stretches or hip flexor stretches, and you're stretching or lengthening in a position that's not supposed to be there. And the fact for me was that if I could just do, I remember one of the first drills I did with coming out of rehab was we called it like a Captain Morgan stretch, and all I did was I just put my front foot up on like a 6-inch box, and all I did for like 10-15 minutes was as I every time I would inhale, and then basically I wanted my rib cage to expand, right? And every time I would exhale, I would want to push my bottom rib, or I'd want to again flex and cause those rib cage to pull down and try to push everything out. And just the act of getting all of that to flex and activate without me actually pushing further into the stretch, how much I can actually feel my hip flexor lengthen just from the fact that my rib cage was moving correctly and my rib cage was expanding. And the fact that like my hip flexors were sore for like 2 days, just the first time I ever did that stretch. Right. And it wasn't like a bad source. It's like, holy crap, like I can actually, I'm not just beating on them with hip flexors, just basic hip flexor exercises or psoas stretches or whatever it is. So, and then even now moving on to, for me, as we get into like the shoulder and stuff, is now playing football, is having neck issues and stuff. As I can tell when my upper ribs, kind of like my 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are off, and I can feel that when my shoulder blade gets tilted and I get an anterior tilt, or I get a little bit of flaring through my right shoulder blade, and I get neck pain or tension migraines and all this stuff. It's some of it's a little bit over my head still, so I don't want to pretend I know everything, but it's been an interesting journey over probably the last 2 years to start piecing all of it together on top of everything else like I've learned and do.
How about going up the chain now? So rib cage up to the
Mhm.
shoulder. What's been some of the best and worst? Because there's slap, there's the posterior, anterior labrum. Like, what have been best, worst, preventative, good things over the time that you've seen from all the different practitioners that you've been able to steal now in your new role?
Uh, well, when looking at the shoulder for me, it's looking at good scapular rhythm. That's a big piece for me. Is how does that move, and how is that coming?
Are
Where is
you
it
doing
coming
any of
from?
the
How are they
stuff
getting
with
it?
you doing any stuff with Cressy? Sorry to interrupt you, and then I'll shut the fuck up
No,
again.
you're okay. I've done I've done a lot of his stuff. I've looked a lot. I've read most of his books. I've read pretty much all of his website stuff. I did this probably 3 4 years ago. I did the original sturdy shoulders course. It was really good. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I think I've redone it once or twice, and I always refer back to it when I start getting a bunch of shoulders, or I have a bunch of shoulder stuff where I need to kind of refresh when it's been a while since I've done a shoulder. He's done some good stuff. And then I think what I've started learning in the PRI world and David Gray and some of these other guys, uh, in looking at not just the function of the shoulder and the individual sub pieces of the shoulder complex itself, but it's now tying in the rib cage and the area, tying again, going back and tying in the rib cage and how it's supposed to move and how it should move and how it should flex and expand and internally rotate and externally rotate and all those different pieces and how that affects the scapula and how that affects position of the scalenes and the levator, and how it affects the rotator cuff, and how all that is going to affect how it's going to tie back into the scap. And it's going to, again, in our sport where you look at, it's a very anterior extension based sport. So now they start looking at how it's going to affect everything in the front, whether it be AC sprains, anterior labrums, or even 2 years ago when I had a couple of pecs, and one was a training, one was a practice, one was a training. Kid got spun like a door, and another kid had his pec tendon tore by Don Joy brace when he was making a tackle. And the kid Don Joy just cut him right in the pit of his arm and
Yeah.
sliced his pec tendon like a filet mignon. On his freak accident, like it was, and I mean, and like that kid had an amazing rehab. Now he's in the NFL as an undrafted rookie starting this year. So like again, he did a really good job. But just even like stuff all the way to there, it's between what I've taken from David Gray, Eric Cressy, Mike Reynolds. Like I've taken a lot from Mike Reynolds, and then one of the other things is he's starting to get popular amongst the masses, but those who do good work and are kind of really, or kind of more in that world, is Ben Ashworth is somebody I've probably taken a lot from in the last 2 years. And actually, I went out to Vegas and visited out at UFC, and I went and did his athletic shoulder course with him, and met with him, and got to have lunch with him and spend the day with him and spend some time. And we've been able to talk since then, and looking at just overall monitoring protocols on top of what my rehab principles have kind of grown and developed into as well. And tying all the objective markers into that well too, that go just beyond PROM, AROM, no subjective stability measurements. It's okay. How are we actually monitoring longitudinal performance, longitudinal readiness just at the shoulder itself? So, like for example, all of my shoulder guys that I've had this past year, we go through, either depending on the guy or time, we either go through weekly or biweekly ASH test. Right. So before our first big combative padded practices or contact based practices, all my shoulder guys I've worked with go through ASH testing as a readiness monitor. Same way I would look at RSI mod on a counter movement jump, or whatever metrics you're looking at. Or if I'm looking at internal load through HRV or Omega Wave, or subjective readiness scores, or whatever, so on and so forth, is trying to tie all that in together. And even looking at different regions as the groin, the adductor, looking at adduction, abduction, adduction at the hip, and looking at hamstrings, all these different pieces. Is nobody's talking about the shoulder itself the way Ben started to the last 2 years. And I've been thankful that I've been able to connect and learn from him, because it's been a big help.
What are some of the tools that you like to use to measure, any of the objective stuff while you're looking at subjective work?
So I think for me, I've been lucky now to be in some places where I've been able to gain some tech and have some other different units, so it's whatever it is. But jump mats, force plates. My favorites are force plates, force platforms, balls, force frame solid. I'm a huge fan of Kanga Tech over the last 2 years since I've been working with Kanga Tech.
I've heard good things about them.
Great things, and the amount of versatility and durability you have in their system, and just the amount of things you can pull into that system and pull out of that system. And the cohesive aspect. I mean, you look at trying to tying departments together so everybody's on the same page, especially with a rehab setting. So it's easy for me, the physiotherapist and the ATC, or like the head strength coach or whoever it is, to know like what I have planned on my end for Johnny, what his benchmarks on, whatever, a full can, half can, external rotation, internal rotation of the shoulder, how much time under tension do we do, how much force did he produce at X load, how is he, what are his monitoring progressions, right? Is he holding strength? Is he retaining RFD? Is he regressing? Is he progressing? All these different pieces, and you can tie all that in together. And then they've done it, and it was built and set up by real world people and coaches and practitioners that are in our setting, so they get the functionality and how versatile and how quickly transferable it has to be within a singular session. But to be on those two, I've also been a big fan of like G Strength and the versatility that Sergio and G Strength they've done. That's done good work. They've done good work. Obviously GPS is there. Those are like my big pieces that I've consistently used, that I'm consistently a big fan of.
So clearly people know that you know what the fuck you're talking about. We're not going to go through the whole body fuck. If anybody wants to hit him up, you can reach out to him later. Talk about how you're able to, in your role then, how the fuck do you get strength coach, ATs, docs, like in the role that you're in? How do you do it? And what do you recommend everybody listening right now?
Um, Honestly, it's time. That's probably the biggest thing I can say is you hope and pray and you hold on to the roller coaster handles. You're in the right place, right time with good people. That's a big piece, and I don't say that negatively, but
No.
there are places where that's an issue where preconceived notions and preconceived mindsets and predetermined mindsets of how people view things and see things don't help. But I think that's could be the first bridge, you need to cross in this area. It's like, is there a alignment, at least philosophically, or alignment in the fact that you're with good people that are open-minded. They may not have to have the answers or the same thoughts, but they're open-minded at minimum with good intentions to other thoughts, right? And nobody's consistently trying to be condescending or talking down, because I can't ever replace an orthopedic surgeon. I'm never going to pretend to be a physiotherapist and put a kid on a table and do what they do. Same way that where I've been other places where I work with physiotherapists or PTs or ATCs, and they try to hold on to kids too long, and then I'm having them watch a kid who's 5 months into an ACL, and I haven't seen him yet outside of doing upper body, but they're bringing him in and he's doing snatches and he's jerking and he's doing high range trap bar, high handle trap bar deadlifts. And like, well, they need to be able to do this before I give them to you. Okay, but there's a cohesion, but there's also a separation. There's also a separation of ability, right? There's like, it's like I was alluding to, is there's certain things I can't do. I can't ever pretend to do them, and I need to respect and learn from their areas and how can it affect mine. I think that's the biggest piece, and then the second biggest piece for me too is as much of a people person I tend not to be. It's good to it's good to spend time talking and communicating and learning, and even if it's just voicing concerns or issues or ideas or bouncing ideas, even if they may not have one you like, but at least giving everybody a voice at the table in every situation. So there's again some form of alignment. I think those are the two biggest pieces. And then three, I think the other piece is for me, it's being open to criticism in these other areas, or open to ideas and letting the other departments be voices and opinions be heard in your area too, and let them feel validated. Because 9 times out of 10, if you're in my role, unless you're a certified ATC, certified physiotherapist, or you have some form of an actual state board or federal medical certification, you're more than likely not going to be the end stage thumbs up, the green light a kid back into whatever they're going to. So you need to be really good at communicating what should happen, what needs to happen, what is happening within your realm, and then consolidating and collating all the others area, consolidating all your stuff into manageable bite-sized pieces for the other departments, and not make them feel like they don't know what the hell they're talking about, like what the hell they're talking about or hearing, and not making them feel stupid, but as well as collating all their information and understand what they're talking about too. So being able to at least minimum loosely understand general healing timelines, general terminology on their end, uh, what is Graston, what is how are strains and sprains and ligament, bone, and tendon injuries graded. So even now today for me, it's I can go in and talk to our docs here or our ATC or physiotherapist, and if Johnny Shortfoot gets an MRI, within by the end of the day, if they haven't come and told me already, I can go sit in their office and we'll sit there and we'll read through an MRI report together, and we can flip through and scroll through and look through all that. And now it's learning, and now you're learning the other side of it, and now there's a mutual level of understanding. And now again, part of that ties into the timepiece of you're validating what they do because you're making a time you're making your time important to learn what they do, and now they feel validated. So again, there's that buy-in effect of what you want to do. So now for me, when again we talk about me being the neighborhood asshole, was now when we're sitting at a medical meeting, which I have one in 2 hours, is when we meet and we set up our plans for any extended rehab or even short-term rehab kids, our head AT and head physiotherapist will have no problem with me holding an assistant athletic trainer accountable when the eight of us have met and we've all communicated an alter G or off ground or off land running progression to get Johnny ready for his on ground progression of how that ties into his isometric training, his isometric testing, his range, his girth and range of motion, all these different pieces, how that's all tying together. And then when Timmy doesn't get him in the pool enough, or Timmy doesn't do what he's supposed to do, or goes off script, well, you better have a reason for it, or you better know what's going on. So when I hold Timmy accountable that, hey, why didn't Spencer get in the pool this week? They're not going to check me saying, hey, you're out of scope. No, they know that I have a vested interest in their side as well. They have a vested interest in my side. Now I have to go about it the right way. And there's a certain point where you get to that point. But same way, if I'm doing something wrong or I'm screwed up, I know that they're going to come and tell me. So it's a level headed playing field.
Speaking of relationships and level-headed playing field, one thing that anybody that follows you on social media is it seems like you have a great relationship with your athletes, and you post often of the guys you currently work with and how proud you are, and then even guys that you've used to work with. Talk about that. Talk about the relationships that you have with the guys and that you've built, and how you go about doing that for any of our listeners that might be struggling with their ability to connect.
You know, in my setting with most of the guys I work with, I would say 9.5 times out of 10, I'm probably going to be closest with my rehab guys than damn near anybody in the building I work with, because I'm going to probably spend more time with them than I spend with the other strength coaches, medical staff, position coaches, other guys on the team, depending on how much I'm doing with the team. So again, that time piece helps, and within that time piece, there's also uh, a lot of times where I'm training guys one on one, or we're having small sessions. And I don't like doing that all the time, but it happens because when you make a point to move their schedule around to accommodate to them and show that what they have going on is important, whether it be they need a day off because they're sore, or they're in the 6 a.m. lift group and they didn't sleep the night before, and you show that, hey, if you communicate with me ahead of time, you tell me, I'll work with you, get like sleep in, I'll see you for the 3 o'clock group, and you just give them those small wins and you show that you care. That's a big piece. And then the other piece is not showing you care by being soft and caving in, but also holding them accountable, because not every day is going to be a walk in the park. And no, I'm not best friends with every guy I've ever rehabbed. That's okay, right? But there's a mutual respect that they know I'm going to try the best. I'm going to do my best to get them back where they need to be. And then the other piece is not to come off as like a desk guarder, but 9 times out of 10, my rehab guys all know how much time I put into each of their individual rehabs and how much I invest into making sure they're ready. Or even if it's at a point when they see me get confrontational with somebody, it's not putting them in a situation for their best interest, and I stick up for them. Because again, it's not only about short-term outcomes; it's also about long-term outcomes. I think those are probably the big rocks of how that happens. Uh, and there's a lot of guys I've rehabbed because of that. That where I've been, other places I've been, where those guys they've finished where I've left and they've turned into friends. Especially I'm not that old, so even especially earlier in my career, not that long ago, some of these guys were almost my age. So I think that's been the biggest piece of it, and I think seeing a little bit of a track record too. And then I think the kids are smarter on average. College athletes, and I would say athletes as a whole, are smarter than a lot of people give them credit for, especially in areas that they're not well versed in. I think most kids, given a situation, can figure out what makes a good coach, who's a good coach, why are they a good coach, a competent coach from different areas. And I think once you're able to display that and show the good intentions, I think that makes a big difference. And I think for me, those are a lot of the main boxes I always try to check. So, and I always try to take an interest. And lastly, I think even when I finish rehabs with guys and they get back to the main group, or they take off to go on and do other things, or if God forbid or whatever happens with me professionally, There's just still always a vested interest. I'm always still trying to watch more than I'm watching schools I really don't care for. I don't have anything to do with, but end of the day, it's for the kids. You're in a servant position as a job and as a title, whatever it is. So again, making the time to watch them play, watch their games, check in on them, text them, holidays. I mean, we were playing Colorado, shoot, maybe a month ago, and a kid I rehabbed 4 years ago FaceTime me in the middle of like the second quarter, and luckily I was doing GPS. I saw it, and I saw his name and FaceTime come up while it was sitting next to my laptop charging, because I was on with Catapult support while I was running a live session for the game, and I saw it, and I had to call him out for the game. And I hadn't talked to Hunter in like 3 years. Since he had quit football after he had another knee surgery on his other knee, and he ended up quitting. He was a walk on. I think he ended up going to culinary school, but he called me, and it's just it's like Sam, it's like a long lost friend. I pick up the phone and It's like we talked yesterday. I used to watch this specific kid used to watch my dogs when we had away games. They used to pay him to watch my dog. So, you end up getting relationships like that, and most of the time it's just putting time into kids and showing that you do good work and you try to do good work.
I don't think there's a better place to end it right here. So I want to respect your time, and I want to thank you because, like you said, you got a meeting in 2 hours. You heard his voice. He's losing it. We only keep coaches that are in the game on the show. So if anybody wants to follow you to learn about what you're doing, go ahead and you can plug your social right now. And then after that, man, I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I'm on most social medias. I really only have them because of work. I think it's just Coach_Zach32. It's nothing complicated. I try not to be a troll. I try not to do anything crazy, but every once in a while, I put out something. I try to put out something worthwhile. It's not always right, but I try.
Nah, man, we'll leave. Again, so he's going to say that, but he'll also put out some really good quality stuff on his stories. Any of his return to play athletes or other athletes, he'll show some waterfall videos or some, good kinograms. So he's being very humble about it. Zach, I really appreciate you coming on because, as everybody heard here, multiple P5 stops, been continuing his career the right way. So any young strength coach, make sure you reach out and follow my man. Hit that subscribe button, right? Continue to support us so we can support you, and everybody else have a good rest of the day. Thank you for joining.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.